Welcome to Elemental Fun, a historical and cultural look of the elements of the periodic table. Hello and welcome to Elemental Fun. My name is Grace.
My name is Cindy.
And we're going to do something a little different today. Instead of talking about an element or a science story, we're going to take a product. Well, not really a product, but a chemical in a
product.
in a popular
many products.
Product, and we're going to talk about kind of the social ramifications of it and how it's kind of become part of our culture. And that product today, or not product, I keep saying
This is
product.
not product. The chemical.
The chemical
in the
is
products.
BPA. I'm sure you've been going around at the store and seeing things that say BPA-free on them. All of a sudden, in the past about 10 years, it's become very popular to see it on things. BPA-free, BPA-free. And even before, we started this podcast, I'd be like, oh, is it BPA-free? And then I didn't really know why. I just knew BPA was bad, and I knew it was in some plastics.
Yeah.
And that's all I knew. And so we're going to talk a little bit about like what BPA is, how it started being used in products in our country, and how it's been a very slow process to phase it out of our products, and why it's bad for you. So yeah,
it's an interesting one.
So real quick, just before we start, I got a lot of the timeline from my information from EWG.org, which is the Environmental Working Group.
Oh, okay. That's a good group. Yeah.
So that's where a lot of my information came from for this podcast.
Yeah, very good. I don't have that much information.
Nope, but she has her brain, and that's excellent. So BPA is bisphenol A.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say it right? Okay.
Sounds good to me.
It is a chemical used in plastics, and it was invented like a long time ago, like
1891.
Yes.
See, I read something and I remember
almost 130 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think one common thing in here is we kind of talked about in other podcasts, but it's one of those things like, oh, this is a great thing. Let's put this in everything.
Yeah.
Oh crap. Before actually really looking into what it does.
Yeah, so it's used in the manufacturing of hard plastic water bottles. It's also, they make an epoxy linings of metal food cans, and it was extremely popular in canned infant formula.
Well, any of the canned goods, like the coating that they put on the inside of the can.
Yes. It was only, about 10-15 years ago that companies started making metal cans that are BPA-free lining. So let's see, where am I? So basically, it's the past 25 years studies showed that despite the promises of everyone saying it is safe,
it's fine.
It is a pollutant to our bodies. It's actually found in 93% of people in our bodies.
Surprising.
And it is a potent developmental toxin at very low dosages. So a lot of things, it's like, oh, we've talked about, it's like, oh, it's really bad if you have a whole bunch of it, if you have too much of it.
Right.
But even at low dosages, this is, a toxin to our body. And it raises concerns for early puberty, prostate effects, breast cancer, and behavioral impacts from early life exposures. And that is because Cindy's going to tell you the little biology behind it. I mean, the chemical itself is made up of just carbons and hydrogens
and oxygens. Right.
But take it away.
So the again, we talked about this with chemistry, right? So when you put different combinations of things together, they have very different properties. So you could have the same compound with one less oxygen, and it could act very differently.
Right.
So the problem with BPA is that it's what we call or is thought to be an endocrine disruptor.
Please explain what that means.
So the endocrine system is basically your hormone system.
Right.
So all the hormones, whether that be sex hormones or other hormones that have to do with digestion or other things, there's lots of different hormones that go on in your body. This one, they do tend to, it's more on the reproductive side,
right,
that are the issues. So basically an endocrine disruptor is something that disrupts or messes with the hormones in your body. Mm-hmm. So the chemical composition, and I don't know exactly what it looks like versus which one it looks the most like, but basically the BPA molecule looks enough like the reproductive hormones,
right,
that then in your body goes, oh, there's estrogen, or there's whatever hormone it's
I think
mimicking.
Primarily it mimics
mainly
estrogen.
Well, because they made it as a synthetic estrogen,
yes,
to begin with, so it looks like estrogen. So basically hormones work in that it's a lock and key system. So the hormone gets produced and it will only go to it will only turn on what it's supposed to turn on in cells that have the receptor for it. Right. So the lock and the key. But one thing that's interesting that goes along with this, it's kind of a side note, but explains some things, is that they found that estrogen causes you to, I think we talked about this on one of the other podcasts, but estrogen, when women are pregnant, they can get or areolas get darker, or they might get darker skin pigmentation.
We have talked about that in a science story. Yes.
Right. So remember that they're like, well, that's weird because melanocytes, the one that produce melanin, don't have traditional hormone receptors for estrogen.
Right.
So they're like, well, how is that working? Well, they have receptors on the inside of the cell, and a lot of these hormones are lipids can go across your cell membrane fairly easily. So they can just go across the membrane. They don't need a receptor to get in. They can just go across the membrane, and then if the receptor's inside the cell, then it can do it. So those cells have that special receptor inside, so maybe they're not as they're not as affected as from regular levels of estrogen, but when it increases because of pregnancies, then it can leaks in there. So different cells can react differently depending on it. So what the BPA molecules do, or any kind of endocrine disruptor, similarly DDT is an endocrine disruptor. They basically either mimic it, so they are adding to however much hormone you have, or they could be displacing it in some way where it's using that one instead of the regular hormone.
Instead of producing it.
Possibly. I mean, there's lots of different effects that it can have, right. But for whatever reason, it is changing how your body is using that hormone. And then maybe if it's using this synthetic hormone, the symptoms are different, or the interactions are different within the body, causing other issues.
Which is why it can cause early puberty, right. But it can also affect things like breast cancer or behavioral impacts from younger kids.
Right.
Okay.
So, because again, there's one hormone can produce many different effects, right. depending on the receptors of the cell and what type of cell it is triggering. Okay. So that's one of the great things about hormones. So one hormone, you get to do a lot of things, like more bang for your buck. But when you have things like this, now you have these wide-ranging effects that are harder
to identify.
Right, and harder to. That's why you have side effects in medications, because you're doing this one thing, but these other cells may take some of that medication and do something slightly different. So it's really hard. That's why it's really difficult to have medications without any side effects, because right. there are so many different ways that different cells can respond depending. And so that's why with this it's difficult. So you have these main effects, but you have all these other side effects that can also occur because of how the body reacts to it. So it's difficult.
Yeah.
And they lots of. I think the first place that you really noticed the BPA-free stuff was in baby bottles. I know.
Yes.
I mean, that was when I noticed it, but that might also have been because that was when it was going. Like at that time was when I had a baby, so right. I was like, that's bad. Yeah. But they really looked into the fact that it produces. Excuse me.
They really zeroed in
right.
on
baby
child products, right. baby products, infant products.
Then as they get it, if they're exposed to it at a younger age, you have more problems than if you're exposed to it, starting to get exposed to it at 30 versus 2
right.
for baby.
So, I'm going to go through, I'm not going to spend too much time because I have 3 pages, but I won't go through it. I'll go through it briefly of a timeline. So, in 1891, BPA was invented. In the early 1930s, the first evidence of its toxicity, because it was used as an artificial estrogen, but it caused reproductive cancer in the girls with moms that were taking it during pregnancy.
Right.
So they were like, ugh. So they took that off the shelf.
They realized it crossed the placental barrier.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And so they went, oh, this is bad. So they took that off the shelf. In the 1940s and 1950s, and they're like, oh, this is good in plastics. And it made polycarbonate. But the problem was that it leached out of the plastic, and it leaches out of the metal, and it goes into the product that you are ingesting. And so that was where the problem is. It's not that the bottle itself is.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like Teflon.
Right.
It's kind of like how
Teflon's fine, but you're not supposed to ingest it.
Right. And because it, gets
Gets
scraped off, then and it's ingested, that's when it becomes a problem.
And that's why we were talking earlier in another podcast too, why you're not supposed to microwave plastics or freeze plastics, because it enhances the leaching aspect.
It weakens it.
It weakens the plastic, and then it leaches out more.
Right. So please don't microwave your plastics.
No.
Especially if you're eating out of them.
Yeah.
So over the next 70 years, BPA has been used in bicycle helmets and water coolers and a lot in baby bottles. And then in 1976, the first laws to regulate industrial chemicals was set. It was the Toxic Substance Control Act. But BPA was grandfathered in. So, the law kind of failed to establish safety regulations for BPA. That was in 1976. In 1982, the government assessed BPA toxicity, but they said, it's still safe. Still okay. I mean, it's fine.
So on that, I think what had read that one thing was that it's an endocrine disruptor, but there's debate as to if it's a true endocrine disruptor, because we looked at DDT, and there's obvious developmental and birth defects that are much more direct, so you can go that's terrible, versus there just being some issues with reproduction.
Right.
So I think to some degree that's where maybe some of this delay has occurred, because it's not something like it kills babies, or something drastic.
It's not an obvious
of
reactions, or
and
results
somewhat varied in what comes out. I mean,
we'll
there's still, but there's.
We'll see.
It's
We'll
not
see
as
how
drastic.
much you enjoy our government when we're done with my timeline. In 1982, wait, I already said that one. They said it's safe.
Yeah.
In 1988, the EPA ups what's considered the safe amount of dosages.
Right.
In 1996, was the first FDA's assessment of Americans exposed to BPA. So it wasn't until 1996 that the FDA actually looked into it.
Yeah, and they said the early 1990s was a team led by an American endocrinologist, David Feldman, that unexpectedly discovered BPA in something that wasn't expected, and then looked into it and started being like,
right. So it was invented in 1891, started being used in things in the 1940s, 1990s is when they started going, wait, let's check this out.
And they found that the BPA produced estrogenic effects, so mimicking estrogen, in cells at levels 5 to 10 times lower than those used for safety assessments by companies that manufactured them.
Right.
And that's in the 1990s.
Right.
So even though it's phased and we'll up the dosage. But wait, we don't care.
Yeah. 1997 studies showed that the levels of BPA found in people is considered toxic. So those were studies that were not government studies. These were independent studies. Flipping my page. Swoosh. Also in 1997, the government tests revealed that BPA contamination is in infant formula. So it was in 97 they went, oh wait, this is getting into the formula that infants are ingesting.
I just realized I probably have a lot of BPA because I was on formula when I was a baby.
And you turned out
I'm fine.
Your body's not falling apart at all. In 1999, BPA was found to leach from baby bottles. So they went from the cans going, it's leaching out of the cans into the formula. And then, it's leaching from the bottles that they're warming up.
Oh, right. And plastics.
Into the formula that they're drinking. But The FDA publicly asserted the safety of BPA for bottles fed infant despite the emerging evidence. So there's evidence saying this is bad. It's leaching. This is getting into the babies. They're like, it's fine. It's fine. FDA says it's fine. It's fine. In October of 1999, a study showed BPA's causes early puberty in female mice.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a study saying, look, this chemical is causing mice to develop faster.
Yeah, and they found in one of those other studies, it reduced testicular sperm count in male mice. It has teratogenic effects, which basically means changing mutations in frogs, and damage to sperm and eggs in fathead minnows, and to sperm production in male swordtails. Subtle effects on sexual behavior in animals. So healthy female deer mice were found to avoid males that had been exposed to BPA through the maternal diet, so not even directly getting it themselves.
Wow, through the maternal diet.
Right. Furthermore, the males, outwardly normal in appearance, demonstrated impairments in navigational and exploratory behaviors which support their ability to find female mates.
And that goes with there's a study in 2002 that finds that BPA exposure affects brain and behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like
It's not reproductive.
It's not just reproductive. It's also, although you have a lot of
leads
hormones
to
in your brain. And from 2003 to 2006, finally, a serious government evaluation of BPA in low dosages. That study was starting to be done in 2003 to 2006. In 2003, the National Institute of Health nominates evaluating BPA. So the NIH is like, we should look into this. In 2006, though, the industry consultant and advisory says BPA is safe. And despite public peer reviews, so they did it off of 2 studies. They based all their reports off of 2 studies. And one of them, the public peer reviews, they outlined numerous errors in that study.
Right.
And the second study, they never released for peer review. They never released it to the public.
Who did it? NIH?
No.
Oh.
This was the government.
Oh.
The government.
You have to have peer review. It's not in literature unless it's peer reviewed. I mean, there is evidence, this has happened before, right? The paper that said vaccines cause autism,
right,
got into a journal, but then was revoked once everybody was like, no, they looked through it. But it's unfortunate, especially if they didn't even try to put it out in the first place.
It wasn't. Well, it might have been pure. It might have had some peer review, but it was not available to the public.
Right.
And
well, anytime you're not putting anything to the public, that's like, well, what are you hiding?
Right. Right. So in February of 2007, the EWG discovered the government's BPA consultant worked for a BPA manufacturer.
Yeah. Oh, look at that.
So Congress was like, haha, we will launch an investigation of the conflict of interest. And the government suspended the contract, but they didn't throw out the work that they proposed. So they said, you got a connection. Hold up. We're not going to change this data that you gave us. We're going to still say it's safe. But we're going to pause you for a minute. So we're going to break down 2007. It was a big year. In March, the first broad study of canned food showed widespread contamination, and the government fires the industry contractor. From April to June, the government assessment contains nearly 300 errors in their study. 300 errors.
Okay.
That's a lot. That's a lot
of errors. Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. In August, independent BPA experts complete assessment of rising concern, and a second advisory panel focuses on the errors in the assessment, all 300 of them. Then in November, BPA advisory panel issues a final report, but it's still minimizing BPA risks because, like you said,
there's a lot of lobbyists and people that want to keep making money.
But in early 2008, the FDA and infant formula manufacturers really came under fire. And, like, this isn't baby stuff. What? Right. And so this is where the FDA response to the investigation reveals that only 2 studies are the basis of the safety evaluation. One was widely criticized, and the other never peer reviewed. So
yeah, that's That is ridiculous. That makes me angry.
Yeah.
That something like that could be based on just 2 studies. I mean, that's why we have science. Like, put it out there. You can have like 20 studies that show you probably a range of
And there
things
were
depending what they're
studies in
looking
other
at.
countries that were saying like, this study shows that it's not
That's
good.
like
This
good,
study
right.
shows it's not good. But of course, our government, you know, which we'll get into even more conflict of interest. We're not done with my thing. Isn't that great? So finally, in spring of 2008, government finally finds BPA poses risks to humans. Oh,
That was
and
2008,
retailers begin
really?
to pull BPA products from the shelves.
Right.
I mean, other people were doing it before that, but like
Yeah.
government saying,
Right.
"Oh,
Wait a
and
minute.
Walmart's like, we're gonna take this BPA stuff off the shelf now."
Whoops, sir.
Um, but that same year, like Canada Health deems it as a dangerous substance, and like they're starting to ban it in other countries. Major manufacturers and retailers are abandoning the BPA in plastics. And then in May, the House of Energy and Commerce Committee writes infant formula makers requesting BPA removed from packaging. In 2008, they're saying,
Maybe we should
dear infant,
requesting it,
yeah,
not mandating it.
yeah,
Yeah.
because then there was another conflict of interest. The BPA is still not banned, and the FDA Science Board member Martin Filbert, he received a $5 million donation from a medical device manufacturer the month he was appointed the head of the BPA committee.
Oh. Follow the money.
Yeah, but he actually didn't reveal that to
Right.
the board.
Of course not.
Martin Filbert, I'm coming for you, wherever you are.
You know, a lot of this reminds me of the Aaron Brockovich story, where they're like, the whole company knew that this is terrible and leaching into the soil, and they're just like, shh, don't tell anybody.
This is like
Right?
our
Like
children.
how? I know. Well, there's.
This is the
They knew that it
children.
was causing people sickness, and they're like, shh, it's fine. I save money. It's not my kids. Whatever. Ridiculous.
So in 2008, over 20 states introduced bills to reduce children's exposure to BPA. And in 2010, the FDA expresses, quote, some concern over BPA safety. But that's the same year Washington banned BPA in children's products. Yay, Washington State!
In 2010, the
Yep.
U.S. EPA reported that more than 1 million pounds of BPA were released into environmental reservoirs annually. Annually.
That's a lot of BPA.
It's a lot, including soils, rivers, lakes, and oceans, including leaching from landfills and release from municipal water supplies.
That's funny because that's the same
Like
year that
wastewater
the
treatment
EPA
plants.
issued a plan to reduce the environmental risks
Oh, see.
by dumping it.
Well, they're just noting that was when they were noting that's how much is going in. So then they're like, oh,
Oh,
crap, we
yeah.
should probably do something about that. Although apparently seawater expedites the breakdown of BPA plastics, so the tendency for leached BPA to accumulate in the tissues of marine species is quite low because it breaks it down before it can get absorbed into their systems.
So we just need to like drink more salt water. Yes.
Yeah, that's not good.
No. So
Yeah, prolonged exposure, even low concentrations for terrestrial and freshwater species can cause abnormalities. In plants, exposures causes an increase in micronuclei in root tips, DNA damage, basically.
Yeah.
And in species of reptiles whose sex determination normally is influenced by temperature, BPA exposure causes sex ratios to become biased towards females because it's an estrogen base.
Right.
So a lot of reptiles like turtles and stuff like that, whether it turns into a male or female is totally
Right.
based on temperature. But now if you're adding this to the
Not
mix,
if you're
they're just
adding
like,
a bunch of estrogen.
right,
into
and they're
their
like, hey, let's have a whole bunch of females. Go go.
yeah, because I've read about that in different environmental situations where like all of a sudden like all the turtles are female.
Yep.
Why are they female? Because there's estrogen in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So
Or like, well, and then climate change could also do that depending on the temperature
that's true.
things. But
So in
that's a different story.
2011, that's when kind of there was an international movement on BPA, especially in baby bottles. But that still was like the EU and China, and
Right.
then our country's still like,
We're very behind on
are
things.
you sure that that's bad?
Capitalism.
Yeah. So I basically finished my research really, really mad at the government. So basically, I threw a lot of information at you guys, and I'm really sorry. But here's the long and the short of it. BPA, it can really mess with your reproductive hormone levels, and it's bad for children, and it leaches from the plastic or the epoxy lining
Thanks, yeah.
into what you are ingesting. If
And
you have,
into scent, then it can get into groundwater and soil
yes,
and other things in the environment and get back to you.
if you have old bottles that you use or old plastics or old Tupperwares, just get rid of them.
And there's BPA, and then there's also like, was it BPS and
BPS
BPF,
and BPF.
which are used as alternatives to BPA.
Right.
So now, again, and I think I read this another time where it was like, these are supposedly safer than that, but really, I don't really know how much that's true if we barely are able to say that BPA is bad.
I wanna say that, like, really, plastic is really not the best choice.
No.
If you want,
It's hard to get around. It's hard to get away
hard
from.
to get away from it. You could do stainless steel, though. You could do
Mhm.
glass.
Aluminum
Yeah.
or aluminum.
As long as it's not lined with
Manganese. Although it make it quite magnetic.
What are we talking about? Why listen to our episode?
Check out manganese.
So, yeah.
But yeah, basically
really
stay away from plastics as much as possible.
try
is really
to
the thing.
go with more simplistic uses of things. That's going to be safer for your body, for your children, and yeah. So BPA is not good, despite what our government says.
It's been shown enough to have enough, even if it's not as drastic as these other things. It's been shown and enough studies to warrant.
There's been enough studies to show that there is cause for concern.
So this is where also the social and cultural side of the power of the people comes in, because the main reason, right, the companies that now have removed BPA from their thing have not done it because the government has ordered them to do so, because they obviously have not.
Right.
What that comes from is these stories coming out.
Social pressure.
Right. And people going, this isn't good and I don't want it. So now they use it as a promotional tool, as an advertisement saying, buy our stuff because there's no BPA in it. So that comes from the power of people
from you
and what they buy. Right. So you can make a difference by yelling at the companies, and if enough people yell.
And isn't it great that the internet is just a big, loud bullhorn for you to yell? Usually I say it's bad, but
sometimes, you can be used for good.
You go to their Twitter account and be like, why isn't this BPA free? Is it BPF free? Is it BPS free? And they'll be like, I don't know. I'll get back to you.
I'm not sure. Let's find out. It's BP everything free. It's BP free.
It's glass. It's been a glass.
Just change it back to that.
It hasn't been cleaned with manganese though.
It's not purple.
I love how we're like aluminum, but not with manganese. Glass, but not without manganese.
But yeah, so, plastics are bad. Stay away from them.
No, but that's good. That's a good point. That like really, it is a social influence that's causing it.
Right.
It is people rising up and saying that they want, is this BPA free?
Dolphin safe tuna came because people heard that dolphins are being killed in tuna nets and were angry about
there
it.
was a there's a whole documentary on it.
Mm-hmm.
However, we have not freed Lolita yet.
No. That's probably never going to happen, unfortunately.
Oh, poor Lolita.
I know. She's been in captivity for 40. She's the longest living captive
If you don't know what we're talking about, there is an orca, correct? That's originally from Washington.
She's from
the coast of Washington, not like this. She's obviously in the ocean.
She's a southern resident.
She is.
Yeah. She's from Washington, but she's lived in the Miami Aquarium for the last 40 years.
Yeah, people are demanding that they should be here because research has shown that orcas do not do well in captivity.
No, they're large, social, intelligent animals that can cruise 100 miles in a day.
The fact that there have been orcas that have committed suicide in
there's been many marine mammals that have done that. Yeah,
come on, people. Anyways, we're not going to go on that.
Digress.
digress. So, so that is our episode on BPA. So now you know a little bit more about what it is and why it's bad, and why all of a sudden everything says BPA free on it. But like we said, just because it says BPA free doesn't mean there's some other chemical that's not in it. Right. So simplify
as much as you can.
Anything that you are putting like anything you ingest in. Who cares if wall paint is BPA free? You're not gonna be licking the walls.
Well, I hope so. Unless you're in Willy Wonka's house.
Yes.
But that's wallpaper. So
It's wallpaper, and I'm pretty sure that's BPA free.
Just maybe the adhesive. I don't know.
No,
They
it's
put a
true.
glue on
There's
there.
epoxy.
Just saying.
Anyways, yeah, I know that sometimes they can get a little crazy and be like, well, like how they say that like mangoes are gluten free, and you're like,
Yeah.
yes,
Well, they I love it. They have like on water bottles, gluten free. It's like water's always been gluten. That's just an advertising thing to catch your eye to be like, oh, it's gluten free. It's good for me.
yeah. So
Yay.
there are fads, but you
Yeah.
know,
Or just using the advertisement for something that's always been that way, but now you're like, look, it's this way.
right.
When
Don't
should have known that was
expect that like a table is going to say BPA free on it.
right. Yeah, it's really only the things that you're ingesting.
Right. Anything that can leach into what you are consuming.
Right.
So yeah.
Leaching bad.
So it's a bit of a depressing episode, but hopefully.
But more empowering because now you know, and knowing is half the battle. Thank you, G.I.
Nice.
Joe. Back to my childhood.
Oh gosh. On that note, it's getting late, and I need to go to bed.
Yeah,
And Cindy has to go home.
I do. I need to go brush my dog. There's no more.
I thought you were gonna say brush
Wash.
my teeth.
Well, I need to do that too, but we gave Wash a bath, and that makes all his hair come off. So there's no more hair on the microphones.
Yeah.
Check out the outtake on the manganese episode.
I'm picking hair off of the microphone.
All right.
Well, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or want to know where we get some of our research, you can feel free to email us at elementalfunpodcast@gmail.com. You can contact me via my Instagram if you want to follow me, which is runmama50by50, which is 50x50. Cindy has her PAC-MAM, Pacific Mammal Research.
Instagram and Facebook.
You
Learn
can
about
see the
dolphins and
really
whales.
cool stuff that she's doing. She's doing some really fascinating stuff. I'm not, but
You're fascinating all on your own.
oh, my running pictures and my little videos of Charlie.
They're super cute.
Yeah, that's about. Or the food I cook sometimes is on there.
That
too.
is delicious.
Yeah,
It looks delicious. At least. I don't eat it.
it is delicious.
Pictures. Yeah.
Correction. So, in the meantime, go take a drink out of your stainless steel or glass water bottle. Throw away your plastics.
Recycle your plastics if you can.
Yes.
It's hard to recycle them.
It
That's
is
a whole nother
hard.
issue. But if you can,
Yeah.
recycle them. But try to get as less plastic as you possibly can in every aspect of life.
Try and figure out if there's a place where you can, like in Anacortes, where you can donate plastics to be melted down and used in other ways. Isn't there that one that's a million Seas?
There's the Million Waves
Million
that they're
Waves.
doing. They're recycling plastics and making it into appendages for people who have lost hands or legs and things like that, limbs. And
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
So you
It's pretty
can
cool.
just Google. You can find ways to kind of get rid of things without throwing it in the landfill.
And it just leaches in there.
Yeah, leech. So, on that positive
All right.
note, my name is Grace,
My name is Cindy.
and I don't know what we're gonna do next, but
It'll be a cool element
it
or
sure
science
will.
story or something.
Or something.
Probably another element.
Probably.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, good job. Start coughing right away.
Well, at least it's during the practice and not the actual podcast.
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 Podcasty?
Yes.
What? You're Russian now?
Yes.
Okay. This turned bad.
Okay.